Hello again. So today is March 26th. Well, actually now it's March 27th. And as of March 26th, we had 69 confirmed positive COVID-19 cases in our state. I'm just gonna, for the sake of this, round up to 70 cases in these projections just to make it easy, and we probably are at 70 cases right now anyways. So looking back at the numbers, Alaska's COVID-19 new case doubling rate is 3 to 4 days. So every 3 to 4 days, our COVID-19 numbers are doubling on average, and I'll show you the data. This is about the same as it is everywhere across the United States. Some places are 2 days, some places are 3 days or 4 days. So here's our dates. Our first number one case was March 8th, and so I'm counting that as day 1. And then around between like day 2 to 3, we were at 2 to 3 cases. 5 cases around day 4, 10 cases around day 6, 20 cases around day 9, 40 cases around day 12, and I'm going to assume that we're going to have 10 more cases at least by tomorrow, day 19, based on the fact that we've had at least that many in the last couple of days. So if you look from day 1 to day 2, not quite a perfect double rate, but you can see the picture there. From day 2 to day 4, that was 2 days. Day 4 to 6, 2 days, it doubled. And then from the day 6 to 9, it was 3 days. Day 9 to 12, it doubled from 20 to 40 in those 3 days. And then it doubled to 80 by tomorrow. So that was actually a 7-day range. So instead of using the 2 to 3 days that it has kind of been, I went ahead and averaged them out and used, I think, a conservative guess at 4 days. Maybe this means we're flattening the curve, but I doubt it, since these numbers are coming from 2 weeks ago when we hadn't really done a whole lot yet in the state of Alaska. We will see. Time will tell. So how does the doubling rate translate into hospital capacity? Because that's really the important question. And even more importantly, specifically, how does it translate into ICU capacity? ICU, that stands for, most of you know this, but just to kind of really make sure everyone understands, that's intensive care unit. Intensive care is critical care. It means you have patients on ventilators, drips, medications to try to keep their blood pressure up, medications to basically support their systems, IV fluids. Patients are not responding, they're unconscious, and we're trying to make sure that we can kind of support their bodies until their body can fight off the virus and they can recover. It's life support that we're providing in these critical care settings. And that's most important because that's what determines the mortality rate. If we intervene on people that are otherwise likely going to die by helping support their systems through, that lowers the mortality rate. If we can't intervene on it, that is a more telling mortality rate. When we look at the 1918 flu, the mortality rates from older epidemics were higher, because we didn't have the resources to stop the spread, and we didn't have the types of critical care resources we have now to help support people until they can get through that sickness. So of the 100, say per every 100 COVID-19 positive case, 80% of those will be fine. 20% of those will need to be admitted to a hospital. And once those patients get admitted to the hospital, about 15 go to a general medicine bed, and about 5 go to an ICU bed. And this is based on all the CDC and various studies in countries that have already kind of seen the after effects of this. What's an average ICU length of stay for a COVID-19 patients? From reviewing a lot of literature, it can be anywhere from a few days to a month. Most people, if they can get in the ICU and stay stable, which actually a lot of people die while they're trying to get into a critical care bed, or multiple die and transfer to the critical care unit. Of the people that are in the ICU, most of the data is showing 1 week to 1 month, and that's on a ventilator or breathing machines. You know, you've probably seen those plastic bubble helmets that they're using in Italy to support patients breathing with positive pressure. So the average from Seattle and New York so far that we have is about 1 to 2 weeks. And there's actually been a range of a lot of cases that were from 7 to 28 days. So for the purposes of just figuring out how this would play out with, you know, kind of a concrete set of numbers, let's use a 10 to 12 day average ICU stay. And really 10 days is probably, you know, in the more conservative estimate, closer to the minimum of 7 days that most people stay. Just while we're talking about all these numbers, note of caution. The numbers that we are seeing today are actually from cases that were positive 2 weeks ago. So, I mean, the testing is taking around 7 days on average for Alaska. 5 to 9 days is what I've been seeing. We have to send them out to Washington, so there's the transport time. The test takes several days to run, and there's a really long backed up period because of the high volume of tests that labs are currently running. And then symptoms start approximately a week after catching the virus. So the range is from 2 days to 14 days as far as we can tell from, you know, looking in each case. And the longest, actually, there's evidence that people have incubated the virus without any symptoms for up to 28 days. So based on the data the investigation that I did and had talked about in the first video, we have about 200 ICU beds available in Alaska. This is, again, a high estimate, a pretty significant overestimate from the data that I could really find. And that includes the critical care equipment as well. So if it's a 10-day ICU stay on average, again, the range is 7 to 28 days. We're trying to use a conservative number just to really make sure we don't, you know, create any hype or overestimates. When will we max out our ICU? Basically, when we have 400 new positive cases per day, that's when we'll be getting the number of discharges from the ICU based on the 10-day mark, and the number of sick people in the ICU already will be at that critical max ICU volume number when we're getting about 400 new cases per day. If you're interested in how that math came about, we'll be happy to go over it step by step with anyone who wants to know more of the details. So this is making some pretty significant assumptions. This is assuming that every ICU bed and ventilator is available for COVID-19 patients. The reality is that the critical care units in Alaska are usually, you know, a significant percentage of their capacity is already taken up. From the data I could find online, I'm guesstimating that our hospitals and the critical care units are about 70% full. So we're also just using conservative estimates on the length of stay. We're trying to use conservative estimates on the percentage of patients that, will get infected, and then the percentage of patients that will end up in the ICU. A lot of the studies show that it's 5 to 10% of the patients that are, so of the 20% that need to be hospitalized, about half of those could end up needing critical care unit, and I'm basically using estimates that say only 1 in 4 of patients that get hospitalized will need a critical care bed. So take a lot of this, number crunching with a grain of salt, and know that I've tried to really use the most conservative numbers. So if the ICU, just kind of look at that, like let's say the ICU is at 70% capacity, and this is, people with cancer, people with failing livers, kidneys, heart failure, motor vehicle accidents, trauma, things still happen to the rest of the population. So that would mean that we could only get to a point where we're having 120 new cases of COVID per day. And that's when the healthcare system will be overwhelmed. So, again, keep the caveats in the back of our mind. All right, circling back to today, 70 cases today. Again, the number is about 2 weeks behind. So this is really 70 cases probably from March 12th. And if we're looking at a doubling rate of every 4 days, we have a graph that shows that basically shows if we're starting at March 12th at 70 cases, where we probably are today, knowing that we're 2 weeks out based on that every 4-day doubling rate. So by April 1st through 2nd, we will have 200 confirmed positive cases with lab results back, again, based on the rates that we're going at now. How long will it take to get to that kind of critical max capacity that we can be at in order to not have more cases, more ICU patients than the unit can handle? That's around April, somewhere in the range of April 10th to 15th, where we'll be having 200 new cases per day. And again, that's when the ICU will be completely full and we are going to run out of equipment. So let's say April 15th, we're continuing at the same rate. What that really means is that we are going to be like Italy. Italy has not enough beds. They have extended every floor of their 1,000 bed hospitals into critical care type, by 3-floor hospitals are by level 1, 2, and 3. The emergency room has turned into critical care overflow unit. They have really maxed out all of the resources in their country. And even at that rate, when they were getting 50 new critical care patients a day that needed ventilation, ventilators, they needed, extra respiratory support, there was nothing more that they could do with the resources in their system. Their system was overwhelmed. Seattle is almost there. Louisiana is heading there quickly. New York is heading there quickly. Alaska, we're not that far behind. This is really, really important to pay attention and see what's going on, because the just harsh, brutal reality is that once we are past capacity, people are going to need to decide how we're going to allocate those resources. We're going to need to decide which patients are going to get an ICU bed and a ventilator, and we're going to have to turn away people that need those resources, but we just don't have any resources left. This is terrifying. This is sobering. This is what keeps me up at night. I don't want to have to decide who is going to get a critical care bed. I don't want a healthcare system in Minnesota to have to decide if my parents are to get sick and need critical care. I don't want them to have to decide about my parents versus somebody else's parents. My colleagues, my medical school classmates in Seattle are writing protocols for how to decide how to prioritize care, how to decide who's going to benefit most from the care. My medical school classmate wrote us all and asked, what should I include when I write a protocol for doctors to have this conversation with patients' families? What needs to be said? This is not some foreign country at this point. This is not, we've seen it happen in every country as it's approached our own. This is now happening in America and Alaska. We are not necessarily any different than any other state unless we take action now. All right, cut. All right. One more really, really important thing that needs to be said. Healthcare workers are at the highest risk, both for contracting COVID-19 and for dying from COVID-19. Healthcare worker illness rates are higher and fatality rates are higher. If we lose our healthcare workers, there isn't going to be anybody to run the ventilators. There isn't going to be enough people to alleviate the workforce that has worked 24/7 throughout the day. I am following physician friends and colleagues through Facebook and on their blogs, and doctors right now are working 24/7. They're staying in their hazmat suits. They're not eating or drinking because they don't want to have to get out of the hazmat suit to go to the bathroom and then waste a hazmat suit. And there's too much to be done. They are staying 18-hour shifts in a day. They are trying so hard to respond to all of the constant critical care onslaught of patients coding quickly, needing intubation quickly, needing to be put on a ventilator, needing drips to make sure that their blood pressure is high enough to sustain perfusion to their brain and to their organs so their organs don't shut down, transfusing blood because the way the virus infects the lungs, it basically causes coagulation factors to be completely consumed, and so then there's nothing left to clot the blood and patients are bleeding out. This is not hype. This is not things to try to scare people. This is not, the media trying to make this a big deal. This is what's happening in hospitals near us all right now. And healthcare providers don't have enough personal protective equipment, masks, gowns, gloves, safety precautions, space. Right now, healthcare workers are seeing the highest viral burden. They're breathing it in, they're touching it, they're getting exposed to it so frequently. They're tired, they're exhausted, they're stressed, they're worried. A lot of healthcare providers are out sick, so the ones that are still working are picking up a lot of extra slack. This is our most important resource to fight COVID-19. Our healthcare workers have to be protected. The number one thing that everybody can do, you can do something about it. What's happening in some of the hardest hit areas right now doesn't have to be our fate in Alaska if we can all work together to flatten the curve. And it takes all of us doing that, because if even 25% of the Alaskan population is still out and about moving, that's enough virus movement to bring that back into the communities of people that are trying to self-isolate. And so we need everybody to take this seriously, to protect a huge, huge number of Alaskans, to protect our healthcare workers. It takes, on average, 12 to 14 years to train a physician. It takes about 14 years to train a critical care physician. It takes 4 to 8 years to train a nurse, and that's just the training. That doesn't even count towards their years of experience after training. You really learn, your first year on the job, your first few years on the job. Every physician and nurse that we lose, we are losing an investment of 12 to 30 years per person. We're losing that much knowledge. We're losing that much experience. We're losing that. We already know it's hard to get to a doctor. We already know that it's hard to, access healthcare easily. And this is going to make that so much worse. So this whole video and the first video I made are to plead with you to stay home, to plead with you to take this seriously. We can do it. We can do a fantastic job. There are statistics and graphs that show how we can flatten the curve, and we're going to produce some of those videos so that everyone can kind of see what a difference they're making and can kind of understand the exponential curve is such that if we don't do anything, it's incredibly steep. Every little intervention we do can lower the slope of that graph significantly. So please, 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 please don't underestimate what you're doing. Don't underestimate staying home. Don't underestimate being cautious and taking every possible precaution to prevent you from being a vector of that virus to somebody else. Thank you very much. I am so proud of Alaska. I'm so proud to live in a community that honors and respects its elders, that really cares about each other, and that wants to have a strong, thriving, incredible Alaska. And thank you for everybody who is working in the healthcare system, who is shutting down their small business to keep Alaskans safe, who is choosing not to travel even when there is something better that you probably would want to be doing right now. There's so many amazing, kind people to thank in all this. And thank you to every Alaskan who is getting the word out and making sure that the rest of our community understands and knows and realizes what an important time this is to stick together and to stick together by staying apart and to work together to prevent the spread of this virus, to stop being the vectors that transmits this to somebody else. Again, thank you so much, and I will see you later.